Hi there, David Hilderman here. I ran as the PPC candidate for the Sandwich Gulf Islands in the last federal election. The reason I ran in the election has a lot to do with this graph. Here is the Victoria sea level record from the Victoria Harbour going back 110 years. The sea level has been rising 0.76 millimeters per year for the entire record and has not increased its rate of rise in response to increased atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. When I first discovered this, I found it hard to believe and had to dig deeper. I looked at sea level records all over the world on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website, or the NOAA website, and found the same thing. Sea level rise rates are not increasing. They are all the same as they have been for the past 100 years. In Vancouver, the sea level is rising 0.52 millimeters per year. At Tofino, the sea level is falling 1.2 millimeters per year. You will not find any location showing an accelerated rise. All have been rising or falling at a constant rate for the last 100 years. Even though the oceans are all connected, sea level rise rates are different everywhere. This is due to geological effects that cause the land to rise or fall at different rates. The only location that I have found showing a change in the rate of sea level rise is at Brest, France, which has the longest, most continuous record on Earth. The record there goes back over 200 years to 1807. Here is the average annual sea level of Brest, France. Brest, France shows an increase in the sea level rise rate in the late 1800s, which corresponds with the end of the Little Ice Age. Because of this, I believe that sea level can be used as an indication of climate change. I also believe that this is why when scientists first came up with climate models showing global warming, that they fully expected catastrophic sea level rise. This is why in 1988, James Hansen predicted that the West Side Highway in Manhattan would be underwater in 20 to 30 years. And that's because his climate models predicted that the temperature on Earth would rise drastically because of carbon dioxide emissions. On May 2nd, 2021, I shared a Forbes review of the Stephen Koonin authored book, Unsettled. I got a Facebook fact check as a result. They linked the fact check to one that they did on a Wall Street Journal article on the Steve Koonin book, which said that Koonin also claims that the rate of sea level rise has not accelerated. Contrary to the claim, scientific studies show that rates of global sea level rise have changed over time and accelerated, notably since the 1990s, primarily due to glacial ice melting and the expansion of seawater as it warms. Okay, so I looked at this and I took a look at the Victoria sea level record, and from my eyes, I can't see a pattern of accelerated rise as described in the Facebook fact check. While door knocking for my campaign, I shared why I decided to run in the election, and I would show people this Victoria sea level record. I happened to knock on the door of a climate scientist who works at the Institute of Ocean Sciences, Patricia Bay. He got extremely upset and claimed that I was lying and misleading people. I couldn't believe it. He said, "You're lying, you're lying." He said that I was presenting data at a scale that did not show the increasing rate of rise. This concerned me. I was not lying, but perhaps I was being misled by myself. Maybe I was incorrectly evaluating the data. So I downloaded average monthly sea level data for Victoria right up till the end of 2020. I then used the Facebook fact check data to create a curve that matched its sea level acceleration. So this, I wanted to see, okay, now if I put on a graph what the sea level acceleration was from the Facebook fact check, let's see what that looks like. And this is what I got. The yellow line corresponds to the average sea level in Victoria if things were happening as the Facebook fact check said. So that shows the acceleration from the Facebook fact check. The thick green line is the linear trend of 0.76 millimeters per year as determined by NOAA on that National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration website. And the red line is the centered 10-year moving average of the Victoria Harbour monthly sea level averages. At the Victoria Harbour, there isn't the pattern of sea level rise as described by the Facebook fact check. I really don't see an increasing trend in the last 40 years. I don't know if this is the case for the whole Earth, since I don't have time to analyze every sea level record with 100 years of data. It's possible that sea level is increasing at its rate of rise as in the Facebook fact check. I gotta ask, is this what scientists claim is creating the emergency? Like I said, I don't think that there is the increasing Facebook cited trend, but there might be. If it is the case that this trend is happening, I don't know enough to say how much of a problem it would be. Then, in October of 2021, I got this Facebook post that was promoted by the University of British Columbia, a top-rated Canadian university. It's time to accept, not resist, rising sea levels. I guess this is what the climate scientists call an emergency. This image shows a rendering of what False Creek in Vancouver would look like in the year 2050 with the expected sea level rise of 0.5 meters. Further along in the article, it says that UBC has created the Coastal Adaptation Lab to work out solutions as to how to deal with the sea level rise. In the article, it says that sea levels in BC are expected to rise 0.5 meters by 2050 and 1.2 meters by 2100. They have even mapped things out. Here's what the Vancouver coast looks like today. This is what they predict things could look like with the expected sea level rise. Oh boy, that looks scary. So much of Richmond is going to be submerged. Here is the actual sea level record of Vancouver. The sea level has been consistently rising 0.53 millimeters per year for over 100 years and hasn't changed its rate of rise, even though carbon dioxide levels have increased 30% over that time. In 29 years, if things keep going as they are, the sea level will have risen 1.5 centimeters, less than 3/4 of an inch. In the UBC article, it says that BC coasts need to prepare for 0.5 meters of sea level rise by 2050. In Victoria, to achieve the expected 0.5 meters of sea level rise, the sea level rate of rise would have to immediately change from 0.76 millimeters per year to 16.1 millimeters per year. It would need to do the same in Vancouver and everywhere else, all around the world. The green line shows this change graphically. This is patently absurd. UBC actually has a team working on solutions to this problem? They are expecting this level of rise? Is this expectation similar to those who expected the apocalypse at the end of the Mayan calendar on December 21st, 2012? They can expect anything they want. They should be free to have whatever religion they would like. But should our universities be funding this? Why didn't Facebook fact check this? Most claims about the climate are difficult to dispute because they are complicated and difficult to accurately measure. The average global temperature is one of these kind of things. Sea level is an indication of climate that I believe is accurate, and we have many records going back 100 years. The reason that climate scientists keep warning of imminent catastrophic sea level rise is because the sea level should increase its rate of rise with a warming climate. I can only conclude that you, I, and the whole world are being misled. If not, then please give me a better explanation. The media keeps telling us that our planet is in dire straits. The general perception is that due to forest fires, deforestation, and desertification, our planet must be browning significantly. The reality is strikingly different than what we are led to believe. This image is the result of a study based on satellite data. Everything in green is where leaf cover has increased. Everything in yellow or red, leaf cover has decreased. From 1982 until 2016, the Earth has experienced an increase in leaf cover of 18 million square kilometers. This is equivalent to taking all the plants on the continental United States, multiplying it by 2, and adding it to the Earth. The fact is that as CO2 levels increase, plant growth rates increase. They say that CO2 levels are higher now than they have been in 5 million years. Plants then, under similar light, temperature, and moisture, grow faster today than they have in 5 million years. Plants lose less water through their leaves at higher carbon dioxide levels, which makes them more drought resistant. Agricultural crops give 20% higher yields today than they would had carbon dioxide levels not increased. More plants on Earth benefit all life on Earth. This is incredibly good news. Why is the fact that plants grow faster with increased carbon dioxide not common knowledge, while the fallacy that oceans are rising at emergency rates is common ignorance, because oceans aren't rising at emergency rates? Why do we have it wrong? Climate scientists always emphasize anything that is remotely possibly alarming, and the media picks up on it. The result is the scientists continue to get funding, and the media gets headlines. In the US, climate research funding jumped from $150 million to $2 billion when Al Gore became vice president. So climate scientists have significant incentive to find reasons for that funding. A few weeks ago, an ad for this event showed up in my Facebook feed. Saturday, 11 a.m., downtown Victoria at Centennial Square. I went to the event, bringing an 11 by 17 printout of the Victoria Harbour sea level record. I stood in front of the stage, facing the audience with my graph of the Victoria Harbour sea level record. A number of people walked up to me and asked what it was that I was showing. I would tell them that everyone in Victoria should know that the sea level has been rising 0.76 millimeters per year since records have been taken for over 100 years. Sea levels have not increased their rate of rise in response to carbon dioxide levels. Every person I showed it to asked, why then are we continually told that sea level rise from climate change is an emergency? I said that I really don't know, that is a very good question. As I drove home, I think I came up with the answer. During the campaign, I was in 5 debates with Elizabeth May. In 3 of these debates, I distinctly remembered that she said that our governments needed to take wartime measures to deal with climate emergency. Have a watch.
I would do what I've been arguing for in Parliament for years now. Treating the climate emergency like an emergency means structuring something like a wartime cabinet. You need to take every party in the House in the same room and work on it together. We need to do what the Biden administration has done, which is recognize the climate crisis can't be treated as an issue for the Minister of Environment alone. It needs to be seen as a national security issue with a whole of government response, and then you get serious. This is an urgent crisis, it's an emergency. And so when you look at one top issue, what's existential? If we don't get the climate emergency right, as C.D. Howe said in the Second World War when he was asked, are we spending too much money? He said, if we don't win the war, nothing else matters. If we don't reduce greenhouse gas emissions rapidly enough to hold on to a livable climate, nothing else matters.
Okay, I gotta tell you, this is what sea level rise is like. It's like you've got a yellow piece of paper sitting behind a couch. Okay, it's a yellow piece of paper. And that piece of paper has been sitting there for decades. It's been there forever. And people start telling you that there's a piece of paper and it's blue. There's this paper, it's blue, and we get told all the time that the paper is blue. The environmentalists are saying it's blue, it's blue. That's like that's like sea level rise. They're saying, oh, there's catastrophic sea level rise happening all over the world. It's gonna flood out all these countries, these island countries, and it's gonna cause all this destruction on the planet. And we keep getting told that, and everyone thinks that. It's almost like it's common knowledge. Of course, yeah, sea level rise. It's catastrophic. The global warming is causing catastrophic sea level rise. And yet, if you actually go look at the sea level rise rates and the records, there isn't any of this catastrophic rise. It's like we just have to look at it. But we keep getting told that the paper is blue. The paper is blue. If people would actually just go look at that paper, they could see that it's yellow. And and because we don't know how things go, so I look at the sea level and I'm like, well, maybe it's changing a little bit. I don't know. And Facebook tells me that it's accelerating like this, and it's like, oh, is that a scary thing? I don't know. And yet then UBC, thank you UBC, you defined what it means to be an emergency. Sea level rise emergency would mean 0.5 meter of rise by 2050 on the BC coast. And then you look at that piece of paper. That piece of paper is yellow. It's not blue. There is no catastrophic sea level rise happening anywhere on Earth. So we've kind of been lied to, Miss May. So Elizabeth May, when she's talking about all this stuff, some of the analogy to the Second World War and C.D. Howe and all that stuff, it's not completely unique thoughts of hers. She is actually getting it from a guy named Seth Klein. He's a policy analyst. And I saw him interviewed on Check after the provincial government elections here in BC. And so this was on right after the election coverage was finished. This interview came on. So now check out the stuff that he says. And Elizabeth May actually mentioned him during the debates.
Thing as a good war. According to Seth Klein, there is, especially when the enemy poses a threat to not just human life, but the world as we know it. For Klein, that enemy is anthropogenic climate change, and he says we need to rally the Canadian government and its citizens in a war on CO2 emissions. Klein, in his book, dug deep into the strategies used during the Second World War and discovered how wartime propaganda and community efforts can be repurposed today for a Green New Deal. So is Klein's belief that we can come together to mobilize in a wartime fashion misguided? He says no. Just look to COVID-19. The pandemic demonstrates something powerful can happen because when we name the crisis and then respond in a wartime scale action, we create a new sense of shared purpose, a renewed unity, and that liberates a level of political action that seemed previously impossible.
Well, so the book is about mobilizing for the climate emergency, and it invokes this wartime frame and says we need to go on to a wartime footing. And I'm saying we need to shift gears and adopt a wartime mindset to actually do this at the scale and speed we need to do it. We need to take an inventory of how many solar arrays do we need, how many wind turbines, how many electric buses, how many electric heat pumps, what's the new generation crown corporations we should be establishing to expedite doing that at scale and deploying it at scale to actually decarbonize and electrify in the short window of time that we have. And so it takes leadership finally getting it. But at least we've now all gotten a taste in this pandemic. Ah, yes, this is what it looks and sounds and feels like when a government actually treats an emergency as an emergency. And it makes for such a stark contrast with the lackadaisical approach both our federal and provincial governments have taken on climate. In both COVID and the war, there are these instances where something clicks for the public, right? So in the war, it's the fall of France in June of 1940, right? That changes the popular zeitgeist about just how serious this is. With COVID, I don't know, maybe it was the cancellation of the NBA season. That's what I remember. Suddenly people were like, what, the NBA's canceled? This is serious. So first of all, what do I want from our government?
Right.
I want to see them adopt an actual emergency wartime footing.
And this is what Elizabeth May says that she wants. I wonder, did the residents of the Sandwich Gulf Islands realize that that is what they were voting for? A person that wants basically a revolution because of sea level rise that hasn't changed in 100 years. Think about that.
And I think there are a few signs of when you know that that's happened. We're getting a taste of that in the pandemic.
Yes.
You adopt a wartime or emergency mindset. That helps to liberate a kind of level of collective purpose, makes new things.
I really don't like the idea that this guy likes that they taken an emergency sort of almost wartime footing during the pandemic. I mean, it's a terrible thing that we had to do. He sure seems happy about this.
Possible. You expect to see your government spend and invest to win, right? Like we've seen in the pandemic, like we saw in the war, like we have decidedly not seen with respect to climate. You would expect them to create new economic institutions to get the job done. So that's what I mean by that new generation of crown corporations. And by the way, I still think there's a role for the private sector in all of this. But there was a huge role for the private sector in the Second World War, but what they didn't get to do was decide on the allocation of scarce resources, because you don't do that in an emergency. And I think that's the mindset we need today. I'm more interested in the issue of the distribution of income, because what we know is that the wealthiest 10% global.
I kind of think he sounded a bit like a Bolshevik there, didn't he? Like, worried about the distribution of income. I think those are words from, Marxists and things.
Are responsible for, by far and away, the majority of GHG emissions. Yes. And in our own country, the wealthiest 20% of Canadians have about double the emissions of the poorest 20% of Canadians.
Right.
And the higher you go up the income ladder, the greater your runaway emissions.
Yeah.
So what I'm actually saying in the book is part of the climate mobilization is also tackling inequality for two reasons, actually. One is because inequality drives increased emissions, GHG emissions, but also because that's how you win. That's how you mobilize people. That is one of the key lessons from the Second World War, is that inequality itself is toxic to social solidarity and society-wide mobilization. If you're asking people to truly rally in common cause, people need to know that everyone's in and everyone's doing their part. Part of what I'm arguing in the book is that, yeah, this is going to be harder and more challenging than our governments are telling you. Our governments are basically telling, this is pretty easy, you can do it, you don't have to make any hard choices. And I'm trying to say, no, let's tell the truth. There are some hard choices.
All I can say is I don't like it. Why are we continually told that sea level rise from climate change is an emergency? Why is that? So I talked about why we keep hearing this stuff from scientists. What about politicians and leaders like at the World Economic Forum and the UN? It's because leaders in the fight to reduce world carbon dioxide emissions don't care about the climate. What they want is for the government to control everything. That's what it's about. It's about the drive to socialism, and I hate to say the word, but it's basically communism, totalitarian communism and global control. I don't know. What else is it? You tell me. So, I wonder if the people in the Sandwich Gulf Islands realized that when they voted for Elizabeth May, that this is really what she wanted for our country.